Hi friends, I know you've been waiting for chapter 3 of Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown, and so we're going to read chapter 3. So in chapter 1 we learned Flat Stanley got smushed by a bulletin board, and that's how he became flat. And he went to the doctor, and Dr. Dan was kind of like, I don't know, he's going to be flat now. And so then in the next chapter, he went to go visit a friend in California. And do you remember how he got there? Yeah, in an envelope. So they smushed him down in an envelope and shipped him off. So he arrived safely, and his friend's parents sent him back in an envelope. And so now we are on chapter 3, which is called Stanley the Kite. So here we go. Mr. Chap had always liked to take the boys out with him on Sunday afternoons to a museum or roller skating in the park, but it was difficult when they were crossing streets or moving out in crowds. Stanley and Arthur would often be jostled from his side, and Mr. Chap worried about speeding taxis or that hurrying people might accidentally knock them down. It was easier after Stanley got flat. Mr. Chap discovered that he could roll up Stanley without hurting him at all, and he would tie a piece of string around Stanley to keep him from unrolling and make a little loop in the string for himself. It was as simple as carrying a parcel, and he could hold onto Arthur with the other hand. Stanley did not mind being carried because he had never much liked to walk. Arthur didn't like to walk either, but he had to. It made him mad. One Sunday afternoon in the street, they met Ralph Jones, an old college friend of Mr. Chap's. There is the dad carrying Stanley rolled up like a bag, and Arthur, he's grumpy. So they're meeting Ralph. Well, George, I see you've bought some wallpaper, Mr. Jones said. Going to decorate your house, I suppose? Wallpaper? Said Mr. Chap. Oh no, this is my son Stanley. He undid the string, and Stanley unrolled. How do you do? Stanley said. Nice to meet you, young feller, the man said. George, he said to Mr. Chap, that boy is flat. Smart, too, said Mr. Chap. Stanley is third from the top of his class at school. Phooey, said Arthur. This is my younger son, Arthur, Mr. Chap said. There is Stanley meeting Ralph. And he will apologize for his rudeness. Arthur could only blush and apologize to Ralph. Mr. Chap rolled Stanley up again, and they set out for home. It rained quite hard while they were on their way. Stanley, of course, hardly got wet at all, just around the edges, but Arthur got soaked. Late that night, Mr. and Mrs. Chap heard a noise out in the living room. They found Arthur laying on the floor near the bookcase. He had piled a great many volumes of encyclopedia on top of himself. Put some more on me, said Arthur. There he is in the rain, kinda grumpy. Don't just stand there, help me! Mr. and Mrs. Chap sent him back to bed, but the next morning they spoke to Stanley. Arthur can't help being jealous, they said. Be nice to him. You're his big brother after all. The next Sunday, Stanley and Arthur went to the park by themselves. The day was sunny, but windy too, and many older boys were flying beautiful, enormous kites with long tails made in all the colors of the rainbow. Arthur sighed. Someday, he said, I will have a big kite, and I will win a kite flying contest and be famous like everyone else. Here's Arthur with all the books on top of himself. He's trying to make himself flat like Stanley. Nobody knows who I am these days. Stanley remembered what his parents had said. He went to a boy whose kite was broken and borrowed a large spool of string. You can fly me, Arthur, he said. Come on! He attached the string to himself, and Arthur gave the spool hold. He ran lightly across the grass sideways to get up speed, and then he turned to meet the breeze. Up, 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 went Stanley, like a kite. There he goes. He knew just how to manage on the gusts of the wind. He faced full into the wind if he wanted to rise, and he let it take him from behind when he wanted speed. He had only to turn his thin edge to the wind carefully, a little at a time, so it did not hold him, and then he would slip gracefully towards the earth again. Arthur let out all the string, and Stanley soared high above the trees, a beautiful sight in his red shirt and blue trousers against the pale blue sky. Everyone in the park stood to watch. Stanley swooped right and then left in long match swoops. He held his arms by his side and zoomed at the ground like a rocket and curved back up again towards the sun. He side-slipped and circled and made figure eights and crosses and a star. Nobody had ever flown in the way Stanley Chap flew that day. Probably no one ever will again. After a while, of course, people grew tired of watching, and Arthur got tired of running with the empty spool. Stanley went right on, though, showing off. 3 boys came up to Arthur and invited him to join them for a hot dog and some soda pop. Arthur left the spool wedged in the fork of a tree. He did not notice while he was eating the hot dog that the wind was blowing the string and tangling it about in the tree. There he is eating a hot dog. The string got shorter and shorter, but Stanley did not realize how low he was until the leaves brushed his feet, and then it was too late. He got stuck in the branches. 15 minutes passed before Arthur and the other boys heard his cries and climbed up to set him free. Stanley would not speak to his brother that evening, and at bedtime, even though Arthur had apologized, he was still mad. Alone with Mr. Lambchop in the living room, Mrs. Lambchop sighed and shook her head. "You're at the office all day having fun," she said. "You don't realize what I go through with the boys. They are very difficult." "Kids are like that," Mr. Lambchop said. "Phases. Be patient, dear." There's Stanley all tangled up in the tree. And that was the end of chapter 3. Tomorrow is chapter 4, and it's called The Museum of Thieves. I hope you are enjoying Flat Stanley, and you're having a great day. Enjoy the sunshine, friends. Bye.